Hey, I am Madison Williams with Oklahoma Humanities, and I'm here with Brenda Granger from the Oklahoma Museum Association to talk about her involvement with the humanities. Okay, Brenda, let's go ahead and start off by telling me a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Well, as you said, I'm Brenda Granger, and I'm the director of the Oklahoma Museums Association, and I'm a lifelong Oklahoman. I was born and raised here. The only time I really left was just to do an internship in New York City at the Guggenheim Museum. Otherwise, I've been in Oklahoma, and I have an undergraduate degree from Oklahoma State University, and I have my master's from the University of Central Oklahoma. And what else do you want to know?
How did you get to be involved in history? Like, how did your love for history grow?
Yeah, and actually, I've been in love with history my entire life. Honestly, I have always enjoyed history, and I think it all started is when I was young. My mother used to take us, me and my siblings and my niece and nephew, to museums around the state, and so they were just day trips, and sometimes maybe overnight, one night. And so that's how I just really started loving history. I started, learning about museums, loving museums, and and so that's, I think that's when it started early on. I remember in fifth grade, my social studies teacher was Mrs. Austin at Ridgecrest Elementary School. And I was so excited because in Girl Scouts, I got to sew her I hadn't even thought about this in so long. I actually got to sew a scarf for her in the shape of Oklahoma. And on the panhandle is where you put, like, down by Idabel in Southeast Oklahoma, you put it through the loop and it made a scarf. And I just thought that was so cool, the state of Oklahoma scarf. And so I made that for her. And then also in the bicentennial year, 1976, I forgot what grade I was in, maybe third or fourth grade. I don't remember. We studied the bicentennial, everything about the bicentennial. And it was just, I think that's another place I really started loving history. And my school just did so much activity around the bicentennial. And I just started loving our nation's history and our state's history then too, and all history. Those are funny stories, I know.
No, those were great. So after graduating from UCO and you did an internship in New York, what made you come back to Oklahoma?
Well, it's funny you should ask, because when I went to New York City to do my internship, I thought I would stay in New York City. I mean, I literally took my resume with me. And I mean, of course, I was just going to be there for the summer for my internship for my master's in museum studies and history. And so I just thought, I'm going to stay in New York City. I'll just get a job here and stay here, because New York City, that's, so wonderful sounding. And so when I got to New York City, I just realized how much I loved Oklahoma, and I was excited to come back. And so when my internship was over, I came back and finished my degree and have not wanted to leave since.
So what do you think is so unique about Oklahoma, especially with museums and culture?
Yeah. We have amazing museums. We have 509 museums in our state right now. That number does fluctuate. And so, but we stay right around 500 museums and cultural organizations across our state. And I feel like that, and if you honestly see a map of the United States, you will see on the East Coast, there's lots of museums, and on the West Coast, there's lots of museums. And in Oklahoma, we have lots of museums for our state, over 500, as I just mentioned. And so I feel like that we have a lot of communities that take pride in their community and they want to preserve their local history. We have so many Native populations, First Americans, that have the most amazing cultural centers, again, taking pride, in their history and their culture, their heritage. And I mean, we have amazing art museums that not only, exhibit, national, international artists, but local artists too. We have great Oklahoma artists as well. And so, I mean, natural history museums, children's museums, we have just really great museums in our state.
So, you work at the Oklahoma Museum Association, so you know a lot about all these museums. What do you do with these museums? Like, how do you work with them?
Yeah, we offer so many different resources for them, and we work with them on a daily basis. And so, just a few things we do. We offer all kinds of professional training, and this professional training could be in the form of our big conference. And that we have every September. Of course, this last September it was virtual. It was award winning. We did win an award from the Oklahoma Society of Association Executives for the most innovative award for our conference. It wasn't just a virtual conference. It was like you felt like you were going to the conference, and it was great. But we usually have in-person conferences, and we're going back to in-person this year with a virtual component as well, because access for all is very important. We want to make sure that the museum professionals, whether paid or volunteer, can access everything we do. And sometimes if you're too far away, or if you don't have the budget, you're not able to travel and actually attend in person. So we will keep virtual components as well. We also offer training throughout the year, whether it's on museum collections, oral histories. I'm just thinking of topics, fundraising, strategic planning. You know, museums are complicated businesses, let's say, and there's many different departments and areas, and we try to offer training in a variety of areas, whether it's a governance, whether it's the actual museum collections. So we offer lots of training. We also do lots of advocacy for our Oklahoma museums. We try to be the voice of Oklahoma museums. And so we ask the museums, their needs, their legislative issues that they would like for us to take forward. And so last week we participated in Museums Advocacy Day, which is in Washington, D.C. This year was virtual, but usually we fly up to D.C. for the last 11 years. And so we talked to our congressmen and congresswomen and our senators and talk to them about issues important to museums. We also do that at the State House at the Capitol. And we have a bill right now we're trying to get passed. And then we also sometimes help on the local level. We don't know if we're asked to help, we are happy to help, but we normally don't go out on the local level because that would be the entire state. But if a museum calls us, we're definitely happy to help on the local level as well. So we do all of that. And we also do best practices. Best practices are very, very important of, high standards for museums. And so we disseminate information on best practices. We also actually try to write some guidance for the museums as well. And we do so much more. That's just like a tip of the iceberg. And if you look at our website, okmuseums.org, you can see the entire list of things we do there of our programs and services. One thing I failed to mention, which is probably the number one thing, or the two things I'll mention that are the top two things that people tell us, is the networking. We connect our museum professionals together. And so that way they can learn from each other, they can support each other. It's just good morale as well. And another thing we have is the most amazing OMA newsletter called Muse News, and it comes out every quarter. And people say that they really enjoy getting that newsletter. It's online only. And that way they can, we keep them up to date on, latest trends, topics, deadlines. And so it's jam-packed, as well as our website, as I mentioned, okmuseums.org. It has a lot of good resources for museums as well. And then with COVID, I will just mention this. And with COVID, we were definitely, supporting, and COVID, I realize is still going on, but we were really, really supporting our museums during this, last year, as far as before it started, we, said that they should be pre-planning for a possible, virus or outbreak. We didn't know what was coming expected. And so a lot of museums started planning on figuring out if they needed to work from home, that kind of thing. Then once the pandemic actually hit, we tried to work with the museums on, most museums in Oklahoma closed, of course, March through pretty much June, maybe a few opened in May, and not even all of them were even open to this day, truthfully. But we worked with them on considerations for reopening when it became time in June for reopening, and we put together a best practice document for that. And then we also tried to help them secure different places for their PPE at the time, because several museums donated their own PPE to first responders in March when it was desperately needed. And so, such as masks and other things. And so, so we tried to get information together so that way the museums knew where to get PPE so they could reopen that with that long list of considerations on reopening, because museums, it's not like opening a normal business. Think about it. You have not only the staff's protection, number one, but the building, your collection. I mean, there's so much more to consider. I mean, here museums have spent decades becoming hands-on places, and then in the end, with COVID, you really couldn't touch at the beginning. And so we were trying to figure out other ways that could happen. Then we also helped once the CARES Act and additional federal funding became available. We definitely gave out that information, tried to help the museums secure funding, because it was very tight during this time, and it's still very tight, obviously. And then and then during all of this, we were worried about the care and well-being of our museum professionals. So our Oklahoma Museums Association, along with several other cultural organizations in Oklahoma, including Oklahoma Humanities, came up with the idea to do a wellness website. It's on our website, as well as wellness expert speakers series. So we have all kinds of amazing mental health resources for the cultural organizations to use. And many of our speaker series we recorded and put on there as well. And it could be anything from burnout to a variety of wellness issues that the pandemic caused. So those are some of the things we've done.
Just a few.
Just a few. And there's even more than that. That's all I can remember right this minute.
A lot of stuff going on. So what's your organization's relationship, or rather your personal relationship, with Oklahoma Humanities, the organization?
I have had a personal relationship with them for many, many years. I'm going to say for 25 to 30 years, a long time. And so back when they were Oklahoma Humanities Council. And so, but of course, Oklahoma Humanities now. And of course, I've personally been friendly and professional friends with and their directors, Nanita May, Ann Thompson, and of course, Caroline Lowry. And so, and also with David Pettyjohn, who was a former deputy director at Oklahoma Humanities, as well as the entire staff. They have an amazing staff now, and historically speaking, they've had a great staff. And that's why they're such a great organization, truthfully. And many of their board members, I do know, and they have an amazing board, and they have in the past as well. So my relationship with Oklahoma Humanities, it crosses over personal and professional together. And so one of my first jobs out of graduate school was working at the Harn Homestead Museum in Oklahoma City. And so there we used one of the Oklahoma Humanities Council, because that's what their name was back then, one of their early original programs, which I think is still active today, Let's Talk About It Oklahoma. And that was a really great program. And it was a great setting, at the Harn Homestead Museum as well, to have that. And so, so that program I'm very familiar with from back in the day, even more current as well. Then we also used them for other programs as well. Then I left the Harn Homestead Museum and went to be the director of the Edmond Historical Society Museum. And there I was involved with Oklahoma Humanities Council with the Chautauqua. So we had a Chautauqua in Edmond, and EHS, Edmond Historical Society Museum, was very involved with that Chautauqua, which was, again, Oklahoma Humanities program. Then I was on the board of directors of the Oklahoma Museums Association prior to my becoming the executive director. And we did the TRACS program, which was their, and I'm saying OMA, Oklahoma Museums Association. We did their TRACS program, we administered it. And that was their traveling exhibition program that went to museums, libraries, bank lobbies, whatever, around the state. And it was a variety of topics. Many of those exhibits were locally produced. And so that was, so I was involved as a board member of OMA with the TRACS program as well. Well, then also at the Edmond Historical Society, they gave us a grant. Oklahoma Humanities Council gave us a grant to help with an exhibit we were putting on called Anne Frank in the World. And one of our humanities programs was Gerda Klein, who wrote All But My Life. And she was a Holocaust survivor. And so that was one of the programs we put on with that grant. And also the exhibit was in the Edmond Historical Society Museum, which is in the 45th Infantry Division armory, which is one of the which was one of the units that helped liberate Dhaka, I believe. And so it was really, really a moving experience. Um, so fast forward to OMA, Oklahoma Museums Association, and my involvement has still just continued stronger with Oklahoma Humanities still. Once Oklahoma Humanities started doing the Museums on Main Street program, which is an amazing program. And I will say, I should say, OMA no longer does the tracks program. Oklahoma Humanities no longer does the tracks program, and OMA no longer administers it, obviously. And so, but when they started doing the Museums on Main Street program, which is part of the Smithsonian, OMA, they asked if I could come and help teach some of the early classes on fundraising and some other things to the communities that were actually getting the MOMS exhibit, Museums on Main Street exhibit, they call it MOMS. And so I helped with some training and promo. And to this very day, we still promote those, promote the traveling exhibits to the museum so they can apply for them. And of course, Oklahoma Humanities selects what museums will be actually hosting, but we still help to get the word out. And then I will say in 2010, I believe it was, that OMA, along with the AASLH, American Association for State and Local History, a national historical organization, they AASLH and OMA, we did a joint conference called Winds of Opportunity. And so we went to Oklahoma Humanities and asked if they would like to help us with the keynote presentation, which was Susan Stamberg, who's the host of NPR's All Things Considered. And they said, absolutely. So they gave us a nice grant to bring her in. And she was wonderful keynote speaker. And kind of on a side story, one of my favorite stories about her was I was driving her back to the airport. And she was like, you know, this city is just really neat. I've never been to Oklahoma City before. This is a neat place. Do you mind taking me to Stockyard City? And I said, I'm happy to drive you to Stockyards. So we drove over there. And so she said, I just want to smell. I mean, there was no cows or anything, right? It was an off day, you know. And so she said, I just want to roll down the windows and smell the smell of the stockyards. So she was just taking in the smell of the stockyards. I said, well, let's go into Langston. So we went in Langston's and she tried on all the cowboy hats and cowboy boots. I mean, for the gal from New York City, she loved being in Oklahoma City. And that was just really, really cool. But we were so appreciative for the Humanities, Oklahoma Humanities, to help sponsor such a national speaker. It was so well received, and it was open to the public, that portion. And so also my other involvement with Oklahoma Humanities, continuing on in my OMA days here, is that most recently they gave OMA a HOPE grant. And that was the Oklahoma Humanities Organization's Pandemic Emergency Grant. And that was once the pandemic hit, that part of the CARES Act, NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, gave the state humanities, of course, our Oklahoma Humanities, funds approximately, I believe, $400,000 to help get money to humanities organizations within the state. And they were so generous to give us one. We so appreciated it. We truly used it for staffing, to keep staffing going, keep the organization going. And we are so grateful for that. And right now we are working with them. It's the Oklahoma Humanities, Oklahoma Museums Association Capacity Building Initiative for Museums. And so that will be 10 museums will be selected to actually attend the conference, receive membership OMA, travel funds, and a variety of other things. And we're going to together hope to build capacity for some Oklahoma museums, probably in more rural, isolated areas. And so, and of course, we always love the Oklahoma Humanities magazine. It's an amazing magazine, and we always love getting that and reading that. So those are some of the ways I have been involved with the humanities over the years.
Yeah. Okay.
Was that too much for you?
No, that was good. I followed it all. Now I just gotta choose what I want to talk about from that. Okay.
That's probably why they gave you my name, because they know I've been around a long time.
I actually selected you from a list.
Oh,
wow. I was really interested. I love museums.
Good.
I want to be you when I grow up.
Yay!
So you mentioned that part of your job at OMA is to advocate for your museums, especially on the bigger level. What do you think is one of the biggest struggles for, especially smaller museums in general, especially before COVID?
Yeah, I would say before and currently is fundraising. Needless to say, it's very hard to fundraise, and no matter what nonprofit you're affiliated with. But one of the things we were advocating for here last week, and it is for all museums, whether they're small or large, is the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, the Office of Museum Services, OMS. We were advocating to double their funding to $80 million because they're the ones that give out grants across our nation. And then the additional thing we were advocating for IMLS is for them to start a grants to state program, at least to research and find a framework for it. And the grants to state program is where the federal government would actually give grants to every state, and that state would then divide that money up and give it to museums across the state. Right now, we do have that in place across the nation and in Oklahoma with the libraries. The libraries have a grants to states program for libraries. They do not have one for museums. So it would be wonderful if we could get that program established, and we collectively being the museum community. That way, and it's the amount that each state receives is based on population. And so our small museums would be competitive. Right now, it's hard for those small museums to write big, huge federal grants. It's complicated. It's a hard process. And so but we still encourage them to do it, but it is hard. Whereas if we had a grants to state program, it would be federal funds would be much more accessible to them. I will say though, I believe they're on their second cycle now. The Oklahoma Historical Society started a preservation grants program, and that has been wonderful for the small museums. And I believe it's up to $20,000. The projects are, I believe. You please check on that for sure if you want those exact details. But it helps on strategic planning, on preserving the local culture, local history. So, and those grants are fairly new, to our state from the Oklahoma Historical Society for our museums, and we're grateful for that. And I will say, Oklahoma Humanities, they have been giving grants to small museums for years. They have, several grant programs that the museums can apply for.
Well, you just read my mind because I was about to ask how much those grants affected you, especially since, it's hard to get more funds directly from the federal government. How's Oklahoma Humanities grants help those museums in particular?
Yeah, they definitely have helped those museums. And I will say, as you talked about pre-COVID, and those grants, and I mean, they're still open now and all. And the museums that receive those grants, I'm going to venture, they would not be able to do the kind of programming that they're doing without those funds from Oklahoma Humanities. And so they really are very important for the community, for the museums to receive the grants, but even more important for the community. So that way they can have access to amazing humanities programs throughout our state and, rural isolated areas, as well as urban and suburban too.
Okay. That's really good. Just 1 second.
I know I talked a lot and said a lot, so you're probably like, I don't even need anything else.
No, it's good. I got more I want to talk about. It's just hard choosing what I want to talk about. This is kind of wrapping in both COVID and pre-COVID stuff, but you increasing capacity for museums and that initiative, but you also talked about your conference and how you want it to be accessible for everyone.
Right.
So what are some ways that y'all are doing that, and what do you hope to accomplish in the future, especially recovering from COVID?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we're kind of feeling our way through that right now, truthfully. I'm going to give you what I think is going to happen, but we're in the planning stage right now, so it can change. And so, as I said, our conference used to be totally in person. We never thought to have a virtual, truthfully. And because the networking part is so important. It is so, important for us to lift each other up, to see each other, to learn from each other. And so as I mentioned, last year was our first virtual conference, which was very, very, very well received. But hopefully going forward, starting for this year, and we're going to do a combination. And this is our plan right now. Again, it can change because we are in the planning stage. We're planning to hold the in-person conference as usual. And so, but with COVID restrictions, meaning we have exhibitors that are different businesses that offer products for museums across our state. Like before, they would be all lined up close together. Well, we can't do that now. They have to have social distancing. So, I mean, we're going, one way in, one way out. There'll be all the COVID regulations, even in September. We will follow all those for sure. But at the same time, we're still going to be as normal as we possibly can, meaning that we'll be able to come together, with our masks on and still be able to learn together, to learn from each other, to network, to try to have a normal conference that we think is normal. We are also, though, going to add a virtual component, meaning that we're hoping the plan is right now, we will still have some sessions. Our keynotes and all of that will be like live streams essentially, but we hope to have some other sessions that would be pre-recorded, and that we would still be able to offer those for the people who are attending live, that they could watch them at any point, or the people who cannot make it to the actual in-person conference, they can still receive some professional development and training by watching those sessions that we will have pre-recorded and ready. So that's our plan. And we, are not going to have some of the things that we've had in the past, like reception. We are going to, we're not going to have the reception. We are going to still have a luncheon and such, but it's going to be the same but different because of COVID. But regarding adding this virtual components that we never have and making it a hybrid, we're excited to see how that goes. We don't want to do all in person or all virtual. It's going to be a hybrid to make it more accessible for people who are too far that can't travel, whether it's travel funds or they just can't do it, but we still want to include everybody.
And how important do you think having access to the humanities, like, some museums, obviously made some online additions, especially in terms of like virtual tours or some more online resources. How important do you think the humanities, and museums and stuff were to people during lockdown? Because it was definitely a challenging time for everyone. But how do you think having access to that was really important on, people's well-being?
Right. Well, I think it's very important. I mean, yes, for their well-being, but also for school groups and students, for parents teaching their students at home, for individuals, families looking for recreation. And I was so proud of our Oklahoma museums for being so creative, fast and creative, to come up with, it was called Museum from Home. And so they came up with so many different things. If you go to our website, we have links to all of those on there as well. So you can do that. Go and look at all the Museum from Home programs. The zoo, I like one day a week at noon, I forgot what day, they did a talk live and Facebook Live with like the animal caretakers and the animals, talking about that right there on the zoo grounds. The Philbrook developed a downloadable coloring book. I mean, there were all kinds of amazing creative programming. Then there were other museums, such as the OSU Museum of Art, that made essentially to go art packets, where on family day you would drive to the museum and pick that up and then go home and do your project together, but they would provide all the supplies. I mean, there's so many amazing projects and programs that our museums put on during the pandemic. Then then once school started, then the museum stepped forward and they started doing virtual education curriculum to help with the teachers that were doing online, as well as the students. And so that's on our website as well. So I do think it was very important, whether it was for educational purposes, for entertainment purposes, for well-being purposes. And I think that, again, COVID was bad, but it wasn't all bad, because probably our museums and OMA, we would not have been so fast to adopt and do this, and it forced us to do it. And it's probably the best thing, because it reaches a broader audience and makes our museums and our museum programs more accessible. And it was better. So I'm proud of them.
Okay, so switching back a little bit from, COVID, we're going to go back a little bit and just talk about why do you think humanities are important, in general? Like, how do you think they affect people and cultures, and just generally, why are they important and why are they valuable?
Well, the humanities are very important and very, very valuable. Is exactly right. And for many reasons, but essentially I'm going to say for really understanding, human culture and understanding the human experience, and especially for understanding where we've been, where we currently are, and where we are going. I think the humanities play such an incredible role in that. And so I think that's why they're so valued. And the, you know the liberal arts in general. And so that's probably one of the best answers I could give on that.
And you said that it's really important to know that humanities let us know where we are and where we're going and where we've been. Museums obviously play a really big role in that. How do you think that most of the public reacts to these museums, and how they gain and knowledge from these museums, and how they accept it?
Right. Well, the humanities also makes you think critically, critical thinking, and that is so important as well. And museums do the same thing. And so essentially, let me think here. Well, I think that the museums are very critical in the community's experience on the history of their communities, or the history of their state, their history of their ethnicity, all histories. And preservation as well, and interpretation. That's another very important key too. Interpretation of the human experience. The museums do an amazing job at that, our Oklahoma museums. So I feel like that the public, in fact, I know the public considers museums like one of the most trusted sources of information. And right there, that says a lot. And so, over media, newspapers, all of that. And so I know that museums definitely the public holds museums in esteem on the truth telling, and we are grateful for that as well. And as far as the future and for museums make people think, again, critically. And so that is very important as we move forward, in society and in life, to have that critical thinking component. So that way we can make the world a better place, essentially, improve quality of life. Everything that the humanities stand for in the human experience. I feel like that museums do a very good job at that. And I know there's statistics out there that can back all of that up as well. Have you ever gone to Know Your Own Bone, that website, Know Your Own Bone, Colleen Dylan Schneider? Yeah.
No,
So
I don't think I have.
you need to look at that. It's amazing. She has some really, really good data there.
I will write that down. You mentioned that museums let communities learn about their own personal community. And earlier on, you mentioned that you loved history because you went to museums. Do you think that you would have still returned to Oklahoma after your internship if you hadn't gone to those museums as a kid?
I don't know. I probably would never have been at my internship if I didn't go to the museums as a kid. Seriously, like I said, that was my love for history. I will also, one other thing that was an influencer that I just remembered was my undergraduates from Oklahoma State University, and my Oklahoma history teacher was Dr. David Baird. He's now in California, but he was at OSU at the time. And we actually got to travel around the state for our class to actually see history, in action kind of thing. And so that was very, very influential with me in college as well. I forgot about that till just now. But honestly, without traveling the state as a kid, looking at our museums and learning about Oklahoma history, about learning about Oklahoma geography, Oklahoma culture, I probably would have never gone into museums in general. So I probably wouldn't have ended up doing an internship in New York City to know if I would have been wanting to stay there or come back. And kind of in an ironic way, it's like that um, that I'm trying to, I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but it's irony how the love for museums and the love for Oklahoma, it definitely keeps me in Oklahoma. But at the same time, I do have the yearning and the longing to learn about other, civilizations and cultures. So I have enjoyed traveling outside of Oklahoma my entire life. And whether, it's around the country, United States, or even to Europe. I've never been to Asia, but to Europe. And I just love, love, love. I loved all those classes in college, ancient Rome and Greece. And, so I even though I love Oklahoma, I also I think that's part of the humanities too, wanting to learn about other civilizations, other cultures. And I love doing that as well. In fact, I was in Ireland when the pandemic hit. So I haven't been anywhere since then.
Yeah, I think a lot of us suffered from that travel restriction. I was supposed to go to Germany the week after everything shut down, and that got canceled last minute.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'll make it one day.
You got it.
Yeah, we you kind of mentioned that kind of along these lines, it improves critical thinking, and it's really an education. And then people are able to travel, but within their own homes and home states, by learning about these other cultures through museums and exhibits and even books and art and music and all of these different things. Do you think that the humanities definitely educates people in that sort of way, and that lets people, let civilization just become better overall?
Yeah, I think you said it just exactly perfect. And I know our museums feel that way. In fact, the Maybe Guerra Museum of Art in Shawnee, Oklahoma, they have some kind of I don't know if it's their mission or their tagline, but it's something like bringing the world to you, something to that effect. Because right there in Shawnee, Oklahoma, we have Egyptian mummies, we have Renaissance painting. I mean, it's, their collection's vast. And any Oklahoman can go to that museum, which is an amazing museum, and explore centuries of the humanities in one building. And so it's very, very inspirational. And so yes, everything you said I totally agree with.
So museums really hold the power to educate and
And
just grow communities and stuff.
yeah,
And we mentioned that it's really hard for them to get funding, and funding is really important because that lets them do that. um, and how important is funding? Like, does it have to be a huge amount, or does just the smallest amount make any difference?
well, of course.
Especially with grants from the Oklahoma Humanities.
Right. Yeah. The grants from the Oklahoma Humanities make a huge difference in the museums that actually receive the grants. And small grants are so critical. I mean, large grants, all donations, whether individual donors, corporate donors, but regarding the humanities grants in particular, those grants really allow the museums to offer amazing humanities-based programs to the community. And I mean, whether it's a small, several $100 grant all the way up to the thousands of dollar grants, they all impact the community, and they bring the humanities to that community that museum is located in. And so I would say whenever you're impacting lives and opening up people's minds, that every penny it counts and is valuable. That's my opinion. No matter how large or how small.
So we also talked about how, oh wait, hang on, let me start over there. That's not how I wanted to word that question. So every penny counts, and you guys are missing out on some critical funding from the federal to state grants.
Well, we don't have that program yet. We're working on getting it.
You're missing out on it a little bit.
Right.
And so how do you feel like that's hindering some of these museums in getting access to everyone and helping, not helping, but hindering that spread of knowledge to especially the smaller communities?
Yeah, and I'm not going, I would not say that the fact they don't have federal funds is hindering them. I do not think that. I think federal funds would enhance them being able to even do more. But I feel like that the museums do an excellent job on their local fundraising, because truly individuals funders, that's where the majority of museums raise their money, is individual funders. We've talked a lot about grants, and grants are very, very important, but truly the individual donor is equally important, if not more so as well. And so so the funding on the local level, whether it's individuals or even local businesses, I know that supports a lot of our Oklahoma museums. And so local banks, local chamber of commerces, and it might be, just outright donation of cash donation, or, I mean, it might be sponsoring the chili cook-off, whatever. And so so the local funding is very, very critical source of financial support for our Oklahoma museums, for sure. And even museums that receive state funding, and we have a few federal museums in our state, not very many, but I don't know exactly their additional funding sources, but I would say even our state funded museums, many of them have friends groups that help raise money for them, because the state budgets is not enough to, what the museums need to continue with additional programming, conservation of and preservation of their collections, maintenance of their buildings. And so they do additional fundraising on top of what is actually allocated from the legislature.
So you have obviously worked with everyone, all the museums across the state. How has your relationship with these communities really changed? Have you been able to see some of the effects of these museums like firsthand, and how it's been enriched the community?
Oh, yes, by all means. And not that I'm friendly in the communities, because I don't know the communities per se, but I do know the museums make a difference for their communities. I know that for sure. One right off the top of my head is the DC Minner Museum and Blues on the Move. And Selby Minner, she is the director and founder of that museum, and it's in Rentisville, Oklahoma. And they have a festival every September. Again, this last one had to be virtual, but it's always in person. It's called Dusk to Dawn, and it's on Labor Day weekend. And they bring in so many people to Rentisville. It just really helps the economy in Rentisville and Muskogee, the surrounding area. And they are preserving DC Minner, which is one of Oklahoma's number one bluesman, lead bluesman is what I'm trying to say, blues musician, and the preservation they're doing on DC Minner's collection, they really are taking off, and it really is helping the community around them as well. And that's just one example. There's so many more examples. I will tell you another one that I just heard last week. Richard Ellwanger is the director. He's the president of Oklahoma Museum Association, and he's the director of the Seminole Nation Museum in Wewoka. And several years ago, they received, excuse me, I'm going to take one quick drink of water here. several years ago, they received a $4,000 grant from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS, their conservation assessment program, CAP, and they received $4,000 to do an assessment of their museum to find out what they needed to um, uh, for preservation purposes and to enhance their building, enhance their collection. So they did that assessment, and so the professional that did that, handed him the assessment. Richard took that assessment, went out into the community saying, our museum needs, this, it would enhance our preservation efforts for this, had the entire list, whether it was new windows or acid-free boxes. I don't even know what was on the list. But anyways, he took that out to the community and did fundraising in their local community and raised from a $4,000 grant, inspired over $1 million worth of improvements to the museum as well as the surrounding area. They bought some property adjacent to the museum that had blighted houses on it. They tore down those houses, and now guess what? It's a beautiful park around there. So museums are helping and enhancing the communities as well. And so you really don't think of everything that museums can influence the community, but there's a lot that they actually do.
So it's really a local situation. There's not too much that is outside resources. It's definitely you have local donations supporting the museum, then the museum gives back to the community in so many different ways.
Yeah,
right?
and that's even important when you're planning to start a museum. Do you have local support? Because if you don't, it's more than likely not going to be as successful. And of course, if you're a statewide organization, that's different as well. But overall, the majority of museums are local.
Which you guys do as a state organization. You help these local communities work with their local museums.
Yeah,
and
we help the museum. We help the museums. That's what we help the museums learn how to work with their communities. Yeah, we don't necessarily work with the community part of it.
Well, that's what I was saying.
Okay,
my trip.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. Sometimes you just say something and that's not what you meant to say, but that's what you were thinking.
You said it backwards, so but
I did. I said it backwards.
Yeah.
I knew what I was saying, but it just came out wrong, and I did not realize it.
I do that too. Well, at least you'll see when you go back and hear the recording.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have anything else for me?
I don't think so. I think that's all I have. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? Any final thoughts?
No, I would like, yes, I guess is yes. I would like to say that the Oklahoma Humanities, they're an amazing organization. They are such a positive force for our state. We are so lucky that they do so much for the communities across our state. We appreciate all that they do for the museums so they can better serve their communities. And Oklahoma Museums Association is a proud partner. And so I think that's all I would like to say, but feel free to call me. Do you have my cell phone number?
I don't believe I do.
Okay. And I will email it to you because I don't want it on the recording. You know what I'm saying? And so I'll email it to you in case you need me for any follow-up. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Madison,
thank you so much.
You're welcome. Good luck to you. And